so much.
Oh, yes, so wait. Did you get my granddaughter?
Oh, I didn't see. Ask if they went to my house. They never invited me.
I don't know
Sometimes
because I didn't
there's
see
like,
them.
the kids that I got were all clusters because of this freezing cold, so everybody's, you know,
Gradations, commas, no commas,
just all falling apart.
apostrophe, semicolons.
Let's go. What are these? Do I need to? I'm on. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the Planning Committee in its unusual spot for the evening. This meeting has been moved into the community as part of the city's commitment to open government and community outreach. And on behalf of all the Planning Committee, I would like to recognize and thank the city's Recreation and Leisure and Information Systems and Technology departments, as well as the City Clerk's Department, all of whom helped organize tonight's meeting. Yes? Is your mic on? Because we can't hear you. I'll get closer. There we go. I'm Liz Schell, Councillor Schell, Chair of Planning Committee. Our Vice Chair, Councillor Neal, isn't here tonight, but we have a good complement. Councillor Osanek, Councillor McLaren, and Councillor Turner are all with us. And we have our Clerk Thompson beside me. We have a number of city staff with us. Planner Argawal is sitting beside our City Solicitor Nicholson and our other City Solicitor Ray. And we have, starting at this end, from the Recreation Program, Ms. Grimman, beside her manager from the Planning Department, Manager Newman, and Planner Eusebio. And we have two Queen's students with us tonight. Joanne Peachy at the far end will be helping with the community benefits presentation, and Nick Cole will be presenting for the special events part of the program tonight. And I think that's it. We have our IT department in the back making sure that these machines are working. And with that, I will read our public meeting introduction. We do have two public meetings this evening, so this is a requirement. Notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of this public hearing and on the forms provided at the back of the room is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning, Building, and Licensing Services. The purpose of public meetings is to present planning applications in a public forum as required by the Planning Act. Following presentations by the applicant, committee members will be afforded an opportunity to ask questions for clarification or further information. The meeting will then be opened to the public for comments and questions. Interested persons are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. There is also a sign-in sheet for interested members of the public at the back of the room. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications unless otherwise noted. The public meeting is held to gather public opinion. Exemption to this rule is outlined in Bylaw Number 2006-75 to delegate various planning approvals to staff and to adopt certain procedures for the processing of planning applications subject to delegated authority. Council has authorized staff to use discretion in determining if an application can be a combined public meeting comprehensive report to expedite the approval process. Information gathered at public meetings is then referred back to Planning, Building, and Licensing Services staff for the preparation of a comprehensive report and recommendation to Planning Committee. This means that after the meeting tonight, staff will be considering the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When this review is completed, a report will be prepared, making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve with conditions or to deny. This committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council, and City Council has the final say on the applications from the city's perspective. Following council decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act, and anyone with an interest in the matter may file an appeal. Interested persons are advised that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of council to the Ontario Municipal Board unless, in the opinion of the board, there are reasonable grounds to do so. And with that, I would like to open our first public meeting. And this is to do with community benefits. And Mr. Newman and Ms. Peachy will be doing a presentation. And after that, I'll open it to the committee and then to members of the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, members of committee and members of the public. My name is Greg Newman. I'm the Manager of Policy Planning, and this is my colleague, Joanne Peachy. She's a Queen's intern that worked with us this past summer and has continued her work on a part-time basis since the end of September. I just want to start by saying that this is a non-statutory public meeting and that we're looking at implementing guidelines that will be used to help in the administration of community benefit negotiations. There is reference on the project web page to corresponding official plan amendments. These amendments will be pursued in sort of greater detail once we have a set of guidelines that have been endorsed and supported by Council. So I just wanted to start the presentation with that. This is a non-statutory public meeting, and we hope to hear from people tonight, including members of the committee who are also members of Council, and helping to direct staff to pursue certain approaches to the negotiation of community benefits. So with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague Joanne to walk you through a bit of the work that we've done to date. And we're here tonight really to receive feedback and some options for how we move this forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg. So community benefits are facilities, services, or matters that are negotiated as part of a zoning amendment application. Municipalities are given this authority under Section 37 of the Planning Act under two conditions: if there are policies in their official plan to do so, and if the zoning amendment includes a request for additional height or density. This presentation will briefly outline community benefits in regards to where we are in the process of developing guidelines, what community benefits are, what is in the official plan, when are they applied, and an overview of 4 key components of the process, including how we calculate increased land value, what proportion should be a community benefit, how the public is involved, and the process for selecting the type of benefit. So where we are now, staff has drafted guidelines to aid the negotiation process when applying Section 37. The draft guidelines were presented at various meetings this summer. We held a public open house and multiple workshops where community groups and members of the development community were invited to participate. Summaries of the feedback are available on the city website and are included in the appendix to the report to Planning Committee. 20 people have submitted written comments separate from these meetings, and these will be summarized in a future comprehensive report. At this public meeting, staff would like feedback on the draft guidelines with particular attention to the 4 key components, and this presentation and the accompanying report include methods included in the draft guidelines and alternative methods. So to recap what community benefits are, they are a tool in the planning toolkit and are applied when additional height or density is requested. They allow for high-level planning objectives to be incorporated into individual projects, and they are negotiated in exchange for increased height or density permissions, and they are currently called height and density bonus in the official plan. They're also commonly referred to as density bonusing. It is a negotiation process to establish this exchange, and there are no set standards for the negotiations. The Kingston official plan has policies in place for community benefits. These policies are located in Section 9.5.25 to Section 9.5.30. In these policies, there's a list of facilities, services, or matters that can be considered community benefits and include 17 categories and include things such as transit facilities, daycares, and affordable housing. There's also factors to be considered for a case-by-case evaluation of these applications, allowance for off-site benefits, acknowledgement of public consultation as part of the statutory process, and requirement of an agreement being entered into with the owner and it being included in a zoning amendment bylaw. The city has negotiated community benefits for 4 projects already, and the purpose of the guidelines is to establish a framework to provide more clarity to staff, developers, and the public. The draft guidelines establish a minimum threshold of 3,000 square meters for this to apply, and it should be also noted that the proposal must be supportable and consistent with the official plan. As stated before, this is a process that only applies to rezoning for additional height or density. In our research and through public input, we uncovered 4 key components for community benefit negotiation. Each component has alternative methods. There's no set way, as this is a negotiation process, but those key components that we found are uplift valuation, reasonable proportion, public input, and selection of benefits. So the first key component, uplift valuation, is the monetary value assigned to the proportion of the proposed building that projects beyond what is permitted in the zoning. Uplift is the increase in land value beyond the as-of-right zoning permissions, and the calculation is applied through a dollar value per square meter to the gross floor area that projects beyond the as-of-right permissions. In this example here, we show a 6-story building where the zoning allows for 4 stories. The uplift is based on the gross floor area of the upper 2 floors only. So in this case, it's 625 square meters per floor multiplied by the appraised value of 110 square meters, and that gives us a total of $137,500. The dollar value per square meter can be determined with an appraisal for a specific property or through a set rate. There are advantages and disadvantages to both approaches. The appraisal provides a more accurate valuation, but the value is unknown until the appraisal is complete. It requires a bit more administration, and in Kingston, comparables to determine that value might be more difficult to determine. The set rate is a less accurate valuation because it's based on an averaging of prices in an area, and the rates need to be set in advance by city staff. But it's a much simpler process to administer, and the value is known in advance so that it can be incorporated into pro formas. Ottawa uses the set rate example, and this is their map showing where those rate areas are. So they have set 2 rates, one for downtown and one for the suburban area, and they have left the rural area to be done by appraisal. The second key component is reasonable proportion. So this is how much of the uplift value is contributed to a community benefit. Reasonable proportion is a term that is used in the official plan and stems from OMB decisions. What is considered reasonable is not definitive and is up for interpretation. There are 2 main methods for negotiating the proportion. One is setting a target range or percentage, and the other is a drawdown method. In the example here, the uplift was calculated at $137,500, but this isn't the amount of the community benefit per se. The amount of the community benefit is a portion of that. So in the draft guidelines, it is set at 20%, which in this example equates to $27,500. Typical range when doing comparables with other cities is about 30 to 40%. Alternatively, the drawdown model, which is the model that Ottawa uses, starts at 100%, and then there's a negotiation process based on drawdown factors. Any of the drawdown factors that they use are documented in a legal agreement, and in using this method, they average about 30% of the uplift value and also achieve broader planning goals. In this example here, compatibility with existing plans reduces it by 40%, heritage conservation features by 30%, and provision of publicly accessible pathways by 10. So it's just demonstrating that you can achieve the same result through different methods. The third key component is selection of benefits. So there are a list of potential benefits in the official plan, but there's no set way of how to select what should be provided. The draft guidelines set a hierarchy of priority with affordable housing at the top if it's impacted or in an area that is deficient in affordable housing. There's been lots of discussion about whether benefits should be directed to those in the immediate area or if they should achieve broader objectives citywide. So based on the feedback, there was discussion to shift priorities to focus on tangible benefits that are based on public input, city objectives, and impact of development balanced with each other. So this is shifting from citywide objectives like affordable housing to those that are that benefit the immediate area. The fourth and last key component is public participation. So public input can be sought in a variety of ways, and each activity requires additional time of staff and the public and can rely heavily upon councillor participation. Many communities use a combination of approaches when looking at community benefits. Vaughan only has a statutory public meeting. Toronto, Ottawa, and Markham use additional consultation meetings as part of their application process. They also, Toronto, Mississauga, Burlington, Barrie, and Ottawa use consultation with their district councillor as a representative as part of the negotiations to represent the public's interest. And there's also a move towards establishing priorities in advance through secondary plans and consultation meetings that are outside of individual applications. And this method is becoming more common. And this concludes the presentation on community benefits.
Okay, thank you. I will first offer the floor to our committee for questions. Are there questions from the committee? Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In our notes on page 3, it's right there in the document. It says that community benefits cannot be used to replace existing requirements such as parkland dedication. We heard at one of the public meetings we had at the last planning committee meeting, can it be used in addition, like to increase the parkland dedication? So we know that the parkland dedication, I think, is 5% of the land for development. So could it be used to make it 7% or 8%, like some other percentage beyond the required percentage?
So through you, Madam Chair, the acquisition of parkland is coming from a different section of the Planning Act, so you can certainly use that in your review of a file. Adding additional parkland on top of the 5% through a community benefits negotiation is possible, but one of the key things that the case law has provided is that you have to be able to demonstrate a nexus between what's being proposed and the need for what you're providing in exchange for. So if the project is seeking additional height or density, if one of those things are happening and you're hitting the qualifying threshold in what we're contemplating now of 3,000 square meters, so if you're hitting the qualifying criteria and we can have a negotiation about community benefits, we could certainly put additional parkland above the 5% on the table, but we'd have to be able to demonstrate that there is a need for that additional parkland and that the need is being experienced by the people who will experience the additional height or density of the project. So we have to be able to demonstrate a relationship.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I just have one about the idea of the citywide benefits as opposed to the immediate area benefits. Is that something that you're looking for from the public to get an idea of what the city would like to do, or if it would be more of a proportional thing, or that we wind up with a policy that is based on, say, the Waterfront Master Plan and other plans, or this idea of the district councillor sort of finding out what might benefit that area adjacent to the development?
So through you, Madam Chair, so the community-wide, the city-wide community benefits, I think the easiest one is affordable housing because that is one that has been identified as being needed through the municipal housing strategy. Other city-wide benefits, I think, would have to be a broad discussion with the community to try and identify those. But one of the things that came out of one of the workshops we had a little while ago was perhaps as part of our secondary planning, so things like North Kingstown and the central city work that we're about to undertake, we'd like to have as part of that conversation a dialogue around what do people think this community is lacking, so that in these secondary plans we can start to identify a list of the things that we might put on the table again when we have a community benefits negotiation. But you'd have to be strategic in identifying those citywide things, and again we have to be able to demonstrate need. And the affordable housing is a tricky one. I know there will probably be some questions later on tonight from members of the development community about how we approach that, but it certainly can be done. We just have to do the work to justify it.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to open the floor to members of the public, and I didn't ask in advance. Would you like people to come up to the podium? And
Yeah, I think we'll sit down and take notes and
Okay.
then come back when everyone's done.
Great. So we'll ask you to come to the podium and ask questions or make your comments, and then members of staff will answer sort of in bulk at the end. So is there anyone who would like to present on this subject? Yes, please come up to the microphone. Hi.
Hi. So my name is Mark Chow. I'm a professional planner with IBI Group. I'm here tonight on behalf of a client, Patria Inc. Development, who is a landowner and developer in the city of Kingston. I made a submission earlier today to staff, which hopefully the Planning Committee will have an opportunity to review. I just want to touch on three main points at the meeting. So first is with respect to need, the need for community benefits. Professional land use planners will often acknowledge, whether publicly or in private, that there's a natural tension between community benefits and standard good planning practice. So good planning is typically a test for approval of an application. And similarly, community benefits are an option only where the development proposal constitutes good planning. So the question always comes is, if it's good planning, why do we need to pay additional costs through community benefits? A few comments on that. And the usual answer for that is additional height or density allowed may result in unanticipated impacts to the surrounding community, so the benefits are intended to try to mitigate those impacts or to address those in some way. However, a lot of the benefits that are often sought, such as parkland or community facilities, are already provided for through other tools the municipality has, whether it's Section 41 allowing parkland contribution or through DC charges or taxes to allow for development of community facilities as the tax base grows. So there's this overlap in the sense of double dipping, that community benefits is asking for something that's already supposed to be allowed for through other tools the municipality has, that is supposed to make sure that development pays its own way and that community benefits isn't needed to help ensure that that happens. In the material that we've seen so far, I haven't seen compelling evidence or really much evidence at all that the city needs to implement citywide community benefits. There's no gap analysis that's been done to say we need community benefits to make up for these impacts that are happening all over the city because of new development or because of high development or highly dense development. The second point is collateral impact. Costs associated with development obviously have an impact. So already the city has fairly high DC charges, imposed fees compared to other municipalities across the province, and all this ultimately gets passed down to the end consumer, the homeowner, and the end product. Since 2008, just to give you a sense of kind of the state of Kingston's housing market, since 2008 a total of just shy of 1,300 new rental units were added to the Kingston census metropolitan area. Only about 300 of those were added to the urban area of Kingston. During the same time period, according to Queen's and St. Lawrence College reporting, additional 5,900 students were added through full-time enrollment. So it's 300 new dwelling units added to the urban area, and 5,900 students alone, it's only students, added into the same kind of catchment area. The implication of this is obviously that supply dictates price, and price impacts affordability. There's general affordability, or there's the more common sense of affordability, which is affordable housing, which meets specific criteria. And then there's general affordability, which is more the broader market affordability. So certainly community benefits can provide for a finite number of affordable housing units as defined by the municipality, but the implications for broader affordability in the market are from additional fees such as those imposed through community benefits shouldn't be ignored. The last one is appropriateness. So if the municipality is going to go down the road of applying community benefits on a broad scale basis, are these the benefits that, are these the guidelines that should be used? There's 3 points on this one. The biggest point in my mind is the fact that the starting point for density is based on the existing zoning. And the existing zoning in the municipality ranges from 1970, starting point in 1976 for 2 of the 5 zoning bylaws to the most recent being in 96. So at best, the newest zoning bylaw in the city is 20 years old. There have been very few comprehensive updates. One update was done recently to implement this Williamsville secondary plan. Other than that, the zoning that's setting the basis, the ground rules for the most important metric of community benefits is woefully out of date with the official plan. The comparable municipalities that are in the staff report, all except one that use zoning for the basis, all of them have zoning bylaws that have been updated to reflect recent official plans. So I think the city needs to look carefully at whether or not zoning as it is right now is appropriate to be used for the basis, for the starting point for the uplift value. Just 2 other brief comments on the guidelines as they are. Drawdown method, I think, is preferred versus a set flat fee of 20% because there's a wide variety of properties and proposals with a number of different factors that could impact how they could be developed. And the drawdown method allows for a lot more flexibility in how those different factors can be dealt with on the site and how they impact development. And last, consider locational criteria. So there are certain areas in the city that have been targeted for reinvestment, redevelopment. Consider whether or not you want to apply community benefits in areas where you've invested heavily in infrastructure upgrades and have done things like secondary plans to encourage development. Do you want to apply community benefits in these areas as it may discourage things you're otherwise trying to encourage in those areas? So in conclusion, community benefits can be of use, but there are no clear signs that Kingston needs community benefits. In fact, there are signs that community benefits may be detrimental to the affordability of housing in Kingston. And so we just encourage the city to take a close look at the basis for this proposal before moving forward with it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for keeping it to about 5 minutes. Would anyone else like to speak to this subject? This is your chance to speak to the public, and there are definitely members of the public here. Okay, Mr. Martin.
Thank you.
And then Mr. Truesdale.
Sorry.
Thanks.
My name is Paul Martin, 961 Linwood Drive. The City of Kingston has established in its official plan that it wants to encourage intensification. Redeveloping a vacant and abandoned site like the iCohen property or KD Manufacturing, both just happening to be located on Montreal Street, we all know have sat there vacant for years. I myself have taken an old, antiquated, end-of-use property, the former Kmart department store located on the Bath Road, and have redeveloped that. And today, there are 365 families that live in that area. This, too, could have been vacant. With the risk that I have taken, I've created 15 years for 20 workers and 20 different businesses for local people. This redeveloped site, when completed, will pay the city over $1 million a year in taxes. Many people are retiring here to our community because of the proximity to the families that they have, be it in Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. We're centrally located. They see our community as a financially viable place in which to live. We are having 2 large plants locate in our area, and one of the key reasons for them is, again, the ability to have a financially viable community in which to live in. They didn't go to Toronto, they came here because they can make their numbers work for their business. We look at people that are in business, and we count on these people to have our community viable. Is it fair for one particular type of small business to pay these community benefits that other businesses aren't going to have to pay? Does it make sense because we are in the business of developing accommodation for people that it's our responsibility to provide as a community benefit affordable housing? Or is that really something that the city and the businesses as a whole have a responsibility? And should you be punishing one particular type of business? I look at the things that redevelopment has done for our community. They've cleaned up sites that were polluted. They've taken, as I did in my case, an end-of-use business and repurposed it. For me, I'm in the midst of redeveloping and going after an increase in density on yet another piece of land. And I'm looking at what you're proposing to me, and I'm saying, well, you know what? I won't. I'll stick with what's there. And what I'll do is I'll build a box, and I'll just meet your regulations that are there presently. And I personally, I wouldn't be proud of it. But that's what you're forcing me to do. And I think that we have to be fair with all business. We can't have one particular type of business out there trying to support what we are talking about as community benefits. And again, it's interesting, this term nexus. I'm not sure if everyone totally appreciates what it means, but it means it has to be connected to the development that you're looking at increasing the density to. So, if you're in a little area where maybe you're getting all of the community benefit and no one else is that fair? Probably not. The other thing that I just wanted to touch on was the zoning bylaws for the city of Kingston. We all know that they're old, they're antiquated. Things are changing rapidly. So what you're asking is for us, as people that are trying to redevelop these end-of-use projects, you're asking us to pay to change the bylaw, which really should have been changed a long time ago. The last point I'd like to make is we kind of look at community benefit and say, well, geez, this is free money. This is great. We got extra money. What are we going to spend it on? Can we increase our parks? Make us more parks? Well, I think as a responsible community, parks are great, but we got to maintain parks. And we got to look at the long-term costs that are associated with all of these niceties. I think it's important that we're looking at living within our means. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Truesdale?
Perfect. Thank you for letting me come speak tonight. I don't want to speak so much tonight about what's in the draft guidelines here. I want to speak more about, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding of where the rental market is right now in Kingston and what the availability of supply is. To give you an overview of Homestead, which I'm here representing, Homestead has about 4,850 apartment units in the city of Kingston. And I brought with me tonight our availability of those units. So this availability report is from last Friday. We update them every Friday. I'll have one tomorrow as well. If someone came into our office last Friday and looked for an apartment, there would only be 7 units that they could rent that day in the city. If someone is looking for an apartment in November, there's only 6 units that they can rent in November. So effectively, Homestead, given the numbers here, we have over 1/3 of the apartments in the city. Our vacancy rate is pretty well 0. In addition to that, what we're finding is that our newer developments are very popular, obviously, with the seniors demographic, because the older buildings, they do not have all the accessibility needs, they don't have the amenities, they're not the proper type of units that are there to support seniors. So we're actually finding, given Kingston's growing senior population, our new builds are actually having waiting lists on them for seniors that are waiting to get in. So what we take, most problems with about this is that it's not actually encouraging the type of housing that the city really needs. It's potentially detracting from that. So, the city's done excellent work in trying to attract investment to the city in the form of, we all know that there's factories that have come on board, employment numbers are up. But we have to remember one of the pillars, and it was spoken about earlier, of that type of investment that they've attracted is that companies are coming here because the availability of housing, the relative affordability of the housing, and by having a continued low supply, that effectively could deteriorate. And housing has to be recognized as a pillar supporting that investment. And the same way that the city of Kingston is in competition with cities in Ontario, in Alberta, or across Canada, United States, the world, this low vacancy rate in terms of rental is not just a phenomenon in the city of Kingston. It's a phenomenon across Ontario. It's a phenomenon across Canada. And right now, there's municipalities out there that are actively trying to encourage multifamily development. And they realize that there is the tool of Section 37, and it's available to them to use, but they're not picking up that tool. Instead, they're looking at ways to encourage development. So they're doing DC waivers. They're doing agreements where if rental housing is provided, then they will not charge certain things. So by doing that, they're effectively competing against Kingston for rental housing supply. And we all know that capital is mobile, and people are going to go where they can see where their projects can get built in a timely manner. So I think we need to remember that Kingston is competing for this supply. And right now, we don't really have the availability of housing, and we need to compete a little harder, I think, for that supply. So one of the things that I think we need to do before we implement these community benefits is I think we need to actually have a study of what's going on with the rental housing market right now. And we've talked to staff about that. I mean, Homestead, we've been building in the city of Kingston for over 60 years. We're happy to supply data from our group. I mean, we've tracked it. We've got years and years of data in terms of what our availability is, what apartments are renting, things of that nature, what people are looking for. And I think that'll shed some light on the type of housing that's needed going forward in the city. And I'd just like to reiterate, I mean, I know staff is investing a lot of time right now in updating the zoning bylaw, and trying to create a comprehensive zoning bylaw. I think it's been delayed somewhat. But I think we need to let that work get done along with potentially studying the housing market in Kingston so that if this is needed, and that can be shown from that study, it can all be implemented together instead of, what I'm afraid of is we don't want to see one thing being implemented that, as someone said earlier today, could potentially detract from the ability of supplying rental housing in this community. And again, I want to go back. I do feel that people feel if they need an apartment tomorrow in Kingston, it's going to be there for them. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And I think we need to be focusing on how can we increase the supply in this market, because it's only going to get worse as we go 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Because again, the census numbers are not lying. Our population is getting older. And the type of housing that our community is going to need, even though it is growing at a small rate, it's changing, where the demand, the traditional demand for home ownership is going to switch for the type of housing that can support people to age in place. And again, in Kingston, that's traditionally multifamily housing. So I just wanted to leave that, obviously, with you tonight. And if anyone has any questions in terms of, these numbers or anything of that nature, feel free to reach out to me. I mean, we're open about that. And we really want to just bring that tonight because, again, I think a lot of people misunderstand what the availability is in the city right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Ken Dancer. I work for Carico Development and CGM Property Management, 234 Concession. We're one of the larger residential landlords, owner-operator landlords in Kingston. We develop in Kingston, we live in Kingston, and we're familiar with the product. I'd love to tell Homestead that they can send their excess renters to me, but we're at zero vacancy as well. So there is a need, there is a demand. In particular, there is a backlog of demand in the affordability sector, as we're all aware. So if you put a pressure on the market that reduces supply, demand goes up, prices go up. And that's kind of counterintuitive to some of our other goals here at the city, which I would refer to as affordability in general, but more specifically in the rental market, as Mr. Truesdale was saying. A couple comments. Vertical. The concept of height to a developer is not a sensitive issue. To the public, it is a sensitive issue. I fully understand that. Just wanted to make sure there's some clarity that verticality is efficiency. You start spreading buildings out or making them odd shapes, your efficiency is lower. Again, cost. So you'll see a pattern to some of my comments that cost is a sensitive issue to a developer. Putting a tax on height specifically is specifically attacking its efficiency. So it's one concept to have a community benefit, but when you use the leverage point as height, that becomes the one thing that would actually afford a developer flexibility. So if you said to a developer, could you give me more suites, and how would you do it, up would be the answer. So there's, again, counterintuitiveness of the tool and the effect. Intensification goals, I think, is covered by others tonight. I think that's well understood. There should also be clarity that a cost to a developer is not a cost to a developer. It is a cost to the end user. Developers don't just swallow excess cost. They pass those along in dollar amounts, whether it be rent or in rental rate, or in the case of condo or whatever it might be, it would be in purchase price. It was mentioned earlier, vacancy in Kingston is low. That's not well represented by some of the information systems we have available to us. I'm sure if you talk to Sheldon Laidman, he would agree that there's actually a pent-up need. And if you look at CMHC, it would show a percentage of vacancy, but that's over the entire market, not where the market is demanding. Zoning limits. So using zoning as the tool to say the height starts here and above that number is where we're going to start a height tax is an odd tool, particularly prior to the amalgamated zoning becoming in effect. If you worked in the principle that the amalgamated zoning had a very well thought out height structure, there would be some logic to it. I have no doubt, even after the amalgamated zoning is in effect, that there will be developed community benefits that are negotiated, and by that I mean more parkland. It's other things that they have the capability of putting in. Happens to be too tall for whatever limit and needs relief from zoning. Goes through the entire process, is supported by the planning department as good planning principle, and goes to planning committee. However, it's recommended to be declined for only one reason, and that's that the developer refuses to pay a height tax. So if staff could walk you through the end result of the, which is two choices. Planning committee overturns the recommendation for refusal and therefore grants a precedent, I would call it, that the planning committee has the right to overturn a community benefit and the development goes forward, again in good planning principle. The alternative is planning committee supports the rejection of the application and it goes to OMB. So if staff could walk you through those two options, which depending on how onerous the community benefit is, would be a definite outcome of some of the first applications, I think that would be value for you. In listening to some of the other presenters, I only had 2 more points. When you increase intensification and density and you build more, I don't think there should be a misnomer that that is somehow free. You paid development charges and building permits, et cetera, on that extra thing that you built, regardless if it was high or more or anything. There are fees associated. There are costs that are built into our system already before any community benefit. And of that additional number of suites, there are also additional affordable requirements within that, additional barrier-free requirements within that, all buried into it, and all of those are now coming at a penalty. So again, counterintuitiveness is an issue, and I already said my last point, so that's good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to present? Mr. Smith?
My name is Barry Smith. I'm with the Taggart Group of Companies. Taggart is the largest greenfield land developer in the city of Kingston. While we mostly do this type of development here, we've also completed major infill, high-density development projects up in Ottawa. So we understand and have experience with high-rise intensification projects, and we want to do the same in Kingston in the near future. Kingston has policies that discourage and limit greenfield development to avoid urban sprawl, as the city wants to encourage higher density projects in the downtown. At the same time, the city wants to impose additional costs on developers in the name of community benefits. These costs would be above and beyond parkland dedication, development charges, and impost fees. We understand that this authority comes from the province and the city's official plan. We also understand the value of contributing to the community as part of a development project. It's an integral part of what we do whenever we develop a new subdivision, for example, parklands, multi-use pathways, that type of thing. But when we're talking about downtown redevelopment, there are additional costs already. Contamination is prevalent in the downtown core and requires a great deal of money to clean up and obtain a clearance letter to proceed. The city can help with that cleanup, but what's the point of helping with the cleanup if the developer has to pay more for community benefits? Thank you. We need the city to view the redevelopment itself as part of the community benefit. Right now, these proposed guidelines feel like the city has taken it for granted that the developers will invest millions of dollars for these projects. This is not Toronto or Ottawa. Downtown redevelopment is not a given. It needs to be encouraged with incentives, not discouraged with costs. We understand that the city has a right to ask for these benefits, but are they really necessary? The guidelines that staff are presenting at this time are just not realistic. We need more consultation to come up with a made-in-Kingston solution that doesn't just cherry-pick from what other cities do, and that's going to be agreeable to both parties. It's already expensive to develop in downtown Kingston. Let's not add unduly to that cost. Let's not rush this process as it takes time to consult with the stakeholders. let's take time and make sure we come up with guidelines that make sense for everybody. Sorry for my voice. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak this evening? Mr. Dixon?
Frank Dixon, 495 Alfred, Apartment 2, K7K, 4J4. I want to start by thanking the city staff for the work that they've done so far on this project. I've been to a couple of events, one a public meeting down at City Hall and one a seminar up at the planning department location. So I've learned a lot about this. Still have more to learn, I think. I also want to thank the developers tonight who've made time to come and present. I've learned a lot already from what they've said. And I would ask them if they could provide written summaries of what they've just said on the record. That would be helpful for all of us, I think. One phrase stood out from the 2 sessions that I attended, organized by the city, and that was that the community benefits should be used to make good planning better, but not to make bad planning good. And we had a bit of an example of this at the last meeting of the Planning Committee with the Forum Arena project, I think. The planners maintained it was good planning. They're asking for community benefits. The public believed that the planning was not at a good standard. So it's a controversial topic, to be sure. One of the earlier speakers, a developer, spoke about the need for housing studies in Kingston, and I would fully agree with that. And I'm coming at it from an activist standpoint, a citizen who's concerned about my fellow citizens having the chance for good quality housing. We definitely have a shortage of housing in Kingston, no question about that, and thanks to the developers who provided the precise data from their companies up to date. It's really important to hear that. What I'm really concerned about is the next cohort of the new residences coming on that were built at Queens a few years ago, coming onto the market and creating a situation where maybe having, people having to be housed in hallways and that kind of thing. We don't need to have that in Kingston because we're making progress on so many different fronts, making our city better. So I know that people other than me are concerned about this. Hopefully council is concerned about it as well. And more information, the better, and accurate information from all possible sources. Also heard about the zoning bylaw update work that's going on, and what I'd like to have is possibly from staff an indication as to when the comprehensive zoning bylaw work is going to be finished. I know it's been delayed, and it is a very detailed, onerous task to be sure to take on. So it's an important one because our community of developers needs to have certainty as they're going forward. And I would just like to add as well, people are probably aware of this, but there is an affordable housing bill update coming through Queen's Park. We've got over 1,000 people on the waiting list for affordable housing in Kingston. Some of them are friends of mine. And they have housing insecurity that they deal with constantly. They like Kingston, but that is a drawback of having to live here. Being able to find a place to stay that they can afford and carry on a good quality life with all that it has to offer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Petrie?
My name is Jay Patry, 819 LaSalle Boulevard. I'm just going to make a couple of quick points on the rental facts. We had 6 units come up for availability for January 1st. We're 100% rented and have been for most of the year. It's now 100% full for January. So the 6 units we had come up for January are already rented, and it's a few days into November. We had 60 to 80 people on a waiting list. We called them. They all ran in. And there are a number of people that are disappointed they didn't get in right away. I call it a community tax. It's not a community benefit. And the numbers, unfortunately, that Greg used aren't necessarily relevant when they use $110 per meter for land costs, because we're seeing land costs in Kingston sell for 10 to 20 times that. So the $137,000 number with the $37,000 community tax is more like $400,000 or $800,000. And when you have that extra tax, it affects the ability to do a project. I met with a developer, John Armitage, the other day. They canceled a project in Amherst because they couldn't make the numbers work. We're seeing construction costs go through the roof right now. Toronto is booming. Our dollar is very weak. You don't necessarily think about it. Everything comes from the United States or China. United States dollar is 30% higher than it was a few years ago. China is pegged to the dollar. So we're seeing construction costs 30% higher than what they were a few years ago. When I built my first building, I paid $5,000 in development charges. I had to pay Hydro One about $5,000 to hook up. We just sold a project on Princess Street to somebody else. As part of the deal, we had to look after the development charges. Those development charges were $13,000. We paid $5,000 per unit just to hook up for power. $5,000 a unit was the UK price. They charged $150,000 for 31 units just for the privilege of hooking up for power. The project I analyzed with John on Hydro One, they were going to give him a rebate for 20 units of $2,000 because they're using a model that looks at how much revenue are. So I'm just trying to say we should look at all of the bits and pieces because it's not a given that development happens. Kingston has been incredibly lucky that they've got Homestead that has a business model that isn't condos. And from that, over 60 years, they've built a third of the housing in this community, and they continue to always build it. But most communities just have condos. And as we continue to tax things, it makes it so we can't do rentals. And then buildings that were supposed to be rentals turn into condos, and they sell for a lot more money. The other point that I'd like to make before I leave you guys is the height tax does one thing. When companies like myself want to build a 1,200 square foot unit, something that I want to live in, I want people to live in, if you got to go smaller, your units get smaller. You start getting these 600 square foot 2 bedrooms. Who wants to live in 600 square feet? I asked the council, how many of you guys live in 600 square feet? Would you want to raise a family or have 2 people in a 2 bedroom 600 square feet? As we continue to hit that height tax, the units just get smaller and smaller and smaller. If we give them the ability to go up, they can get bigger units. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to present this evening before I ask staff for some responses? Seeing none, Mr. Newman and Ms. Peachy, thank you.
Firstly, thank you very much for the comments tonight. They are appreciated, and as we started, we've had a number of engagement sessions with community groups and developers, development interests, and certainly appreciate the dialogue and the discussion that we've had. And the draft of the guidelines that we've put on the website, I think, is an iteration of a second draft that was done a number of months ago. Actually, I think it predates some of the consultation that we've had since, and it remains a work in progress. So this is not a done deal. We do think that at some point we will be presenting to council guidelines for endorsement, because the reality is this is a tool that's available to us, and we are receiving more and more complex applications in the city. We want to have the availability to have a structured negotiation and to not be flying by the seat of our pants. So to have a set of guidelines is an important tool for staff, so that we're consistent in how we have the conversation, and that we're holding everyone to the same standard. Now that standard itself is something that we need to define together, and there's been a lot of good feedback tonight. I'm going to provide what I hope is a brief response to each of the comments in turn, and I'll look to my colleague Joanne to add if she thinks I've missed anything. So with respect to Mr. Tao's comments, and I do appreciate that I've received a submission on behalf of Mr. Patry from IBI, so I did read it before tonight, and I think there's some very strong arguments presented in that letter, so certainly be taking some time to look at that. But one of the comments that has been recurring through some of the discussion is why do we even need to put community benefits on the table? Is Kingston ready for community benefits? Is it going to be a cost that's simply passed on to the renter or the buyer? And as I mentioned, and as Joanne mentioned in the presentation, the intent of community benefits is to make a good project better. And what I mean by that is we can get to a position of support for the project. So we're in a position of being able to support, say, the box, and now we want to look at how we can make that box more supportable by adding some enhancements to it, or by adding some enhancements to the community that is receiving the box. So for example, we have a number of policies in our official plan that are enabling or encouraging. So it might say on this corner, we'd like a building that has a high degree of architectural design. We'd like it. We can't require it, but we'd like it. So there's an opportunity here under Section 37 of the Planning Act to put that on the table to say, yeah, we could probably get to a position of supporting this, but we'd like to negotiate for a better architectural design because we have the ability to at least throw that on the table through a negotiation. It is a negotiation. It is something that we have access to. If we can demonstrate that it's aligning with a broader public objective that's been articulated in the official plan, then that's what we'd like to do. The collateral impact, or the impact of additional costs, is something that was repeated by a number of speakers tonight. It's not lost on any of us. We certainly appreciate that this is just one additional cost on many others. The only thing that I would offer that we're trying to wrap our heads around is community benefits only happens when we get into a discussion of someone seeking additional height or density. So you're seeking to put another 2 or 3 or 15 stories on your building, or you're seeking to add density. We haven't really had much of a discussion about this being applied in the context of density. I think 9 times out of 10, if not more, we'll be talking about this in the context of height. But that height will give you, the developer or the proponent, access to greater revenue potential. So it is potentially coming with additional costs, but it also comes as a result of a request for additional opportunity for revenue. So one of the options that we presented I just wanted to go back to it because I think it's something that we're looking for direction on. The current iteration of the guidelines do put a set number in place. I think they use 20%. So in every case, we're going to try to negotiate to get 20% of the uplift value of the project. But a lot of what I've heard tonight is your zoning's out of date. You shouldn't even be talking about community benefits until you update your zoning. One of the opportunities that we would have if we were to consider a drawdown approach, which really does reflect the negotiation, the nature of the negotiation, is that if a proponent were to say that the as-of-right zoning is 12, but every building around me is 30 meters, and the as-of-right on my site is 12, why are you going to start the community benefits negotiation at 12? Shouldn't you start the community benefits negotiation at something closer to 30? Because clearly there's an established expectation about what development's supposed to look like here. So that speaks to this area right here where we talk about compatibility of the project with established built form expectations or established official plan expectations. So you're right, our zoning work needs to catch up to our official plan, specifically where we have strategic policies, like the downtown in Williamsville. But if we did pursue or at least contemplate a drawdown approach, we would be able to put that acknowledgement on the table in a discussion. Mr. Tao also mentioned about where we've done strategic planning, and perhaps we need to go to a geographic sort of area-specific approach to negotiating benefits. Maybe you don't even contemplate them outside of areas where you've done strategic planning. That's certainly something that I think we'll take back and we'll evaluate. We have looked at it as part of our deliberations in-house, but we can certainly look at maybe we have area-specific approaches to community benefits. Mr. Martin described a lot about the implications of recurring costs and the cost to the developer and the costs being passed on to the buyer or the renter. And we did hear a lot tonight about the the limitations and the vacancy rates in the city of Kingston and what that means to the community at large. Mr. Martin mentioned his work on some brownfield sites, and again, if we had a proposal for a project that was seeking additional height or density on a brownfield site, so a former industrial site, that might be one of the considerations we use in the drawdown to reduce the potential value of a community benefit. So there are a lot of options if we were to pursue a drawdown approach. In many cases, you may end up at zero because you are simply doing, as a good developer, the things that this community wants to see anyway. Mr. Truesdale, on behalf of Homestead, certainly the numbers are staggering. Mr. Patry's numbers are staggering, as are Mr. Dancer's. So I would like to sort of debrief offline and talk about doing some further research in this market. I think not only is it important that our planning department has a good grip on our rental vacancy rate, but we have to have a conversation, a bigger conversation of population and demographic change in the city of Kingston. And so I like the idea of sharing information and working together on that. As it relates to this, again, I think that if we were to pursue a drawdown approach to the guidelines, we could perhaps consider in the context of a negotiation what it means to be able to provide rental housing to the market. I just have to comment on this because I take a bit of exception to it, respectfully. So lines on a map have intent, or they should at least have intent. And so we are trying to be strategic as a planning department with respect to where we're directing growth, and equally as importantly, where we are trying to perhaps not direct growth for the benefit of the people that live in established areas that we would like to remain the way they are today. So I think there's an opportunity to look at applying community benefits in context that makes sense, and perhaps to applying them more rigorously in contexts where the additional height or density perhaps does not make sense. The scenario that Mr. Dancer presented is certainly a difficult one, and it's one that I'd probably like a little more time to wrap my head around. I think the scenario, if I got it right, was that we have an application seeking additional height or density. We have a recommendation of staff that supports the project with community benefits being tied in. But the developer goes to the meeting and says, that's fine, but I'm not going to pay the community benefits, so I'm willing to walk away from this project. And so where do we land? There are two thoughts on that, and I'm sort of doing this on the fly, so we'll have to debrief and perhaps think through this a little more. There are two benefits I see to sticking with a community benefits proposal through a negotiation that ideally is mutually acceptable. But if it does fall through and in the end the developer says they're not going to support the project, they're just going to abandon the project perhaps because it's too great. There's certainly there's a political conversation I think to have there. At the end of the day, I think council is the decision-making body on amendments to our zoning bylaw. So if council were concerned that a project was going to fall through because of a community benefit negotiation that didn't go the way that we thought it would, then that's a decision to be made at council. I will say, though, that I think, as envisioned here, one of the pieces that we presented is the public dialogue that we are hoping to wrap our heads around. One of the opportunities of a community benefit negotiation is you're able to demonstrate to the public that, yes, there's an additional 2 stories of height, and yes, that will impact you, but let's have a conversation about ways that we can address that impact and in doing so offer something that this community has identified as being desirable. So there may be an opportunity here to garner public support where that support may not otherwise be forthcoming. Mr. Dixon offered some comments on some of the dialogue that we've had to date with respect to this being used to make good planning better and not a bad project good. With respect to the zoning bylaw, as you probably know, we're embarking on a what's called the Central City Growth and Infill Strategy, or intensification strategy. So we're looking at the entirety of the area of bylaw 8499, which is a former city of Kingston. And we're looking at putting in place some zoning changes that will limit change in some areas and push change into other areas. And so that, obviously, that fairly substantial project has major repercussions for zoning, and so we've put the zoning bylaw on hold until we get the majority of that secondary plan, area-specific plan done. So short answer is we'll likely pick up the new zoning bylaw with greater emphasis in the later part of next year, but it's likely not going to be in any position to try to implement until 2019. I'll also say that we are not sitting idle on the zoning. There are a number of bucket issues that have been presented through the public dialogue to date. So we are working on a number of issues, one of which is things like secondary suites, private versus public schools, temporary vacation rentals, that sort of thing. And last, Mr. Patry's comments, I think I've said a response to most of the items. With respect to the $100 per square meter, that value was identified in the appraisal for the Capitol Theatre project. That was, we did have a community benefits negotiation with that project. I think actually the number itself was reflective of some recognition of the potential for contamination in the area, so that has come up. So there actually was in the land value recognition of an influencing factor there that brought the value down. But the point's not lost on us. We recognize that costs are going up.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any more questions from the committee? I'd like to just comment to thank the voices we've heard tonight, because we don't hear that very often. And there's definitely a feeling from the people that spoke tonight of there's a somewhat an anger. And at our public meetings, we feel it quite directly from the public as well. So I'm hoping that somehow, since we know we need more rental housing in this city, and we have definite arguments regularly about height and how the city's going to look and how it's going to grow from both sides, that the more we can work together, the better. And if there are ways that we can make it more amenable for the other side to think that the proposals are a good idea, the better, because we certainly feel it as a council, that there are two sides of the vision of the city, that there's a lot of contention, and it would be so much preferable if we could build it with some compromises and agreements. As we know, we've got another OMB hearing coming up on the 22nd of this month, and it would be great if we could grow with less contention. So I think I'll leave it at that, and I really do appreciate hearing from everyone tonight. Thank you.
Thanks.
And with that, I will close our public meeting and open our second public meeting, which is to do with special events and city-owned facilities. And we'll have Mr. Cool and Ms. Eusebio. Mr. Newman.
Through you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Greg Newman. I just wanted to introduce Nick Cool and Anne-Marie Eusebio. Anne-Marie's a planner with the city, and Nick is a planning intern from Queen's University. So I'll turn the floor over to Nick and Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Greg. So tonight I'm presenting this report on the short-term events at city-owned facilities zoning bylaw amendment that is being put forward by the City of Kingston. The city is proposing to amend the zoning for 5 municipally owned properties for arenas and the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor facility that we are currently inside. So the 5 facilities that we are looking at are 1030 Sunnyside Road, which is the Cataraqui Community Center, 303 York Street, the Kingston Memorial Center, 100 Days Road, which is Center 70, 1350 Gardners Road, the Invista Center, and then 53 Yonge Street, which is where we are right now, Portsmouth Olympic Harbor. The purpose for the zoning bylaw amendment is to permit trade shows and specific day retail sales as an accessory use at the Invista Center, Center 70, Cataraqui Community Center, and Kingston Memorial Center, and to permit trade shows, exhibition events, and ancillary sales as an accessory use at the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor. And as part of those zoning bylaw amendments, we'll be creating some new definitions as well. I'll be going over what those mean as we go forward with the presentation. So the main reason, the real justification for why we're doing what we're doing right now is that we want to make sure we are supporting the fiscal responsibility of how we manage our public assets here in the city. So currently we have these arenas and we have Portsmouth Olympic Harbor and they are underutilized. We have them sitting empty quite frequently. So any opportunity that we can to monetize them and use them in a more fiscally responsible way, we believe that that is in the public's interest to do so. We're also hoping to create some clarity and consistency with how we actually issue short-term event licenses. So what we're proposing to do is not a radical change from what's already happening at these facilities. We're having a lot of short-term events and a lot of trade shows occurring in these facilities already, and they are generally permitted. We have rules and regulations that we can use to make them fit, but what we want to do is we want to make it very explicitly clear what we do permit and what we don't. We have rejected applications for trade shows and sales events before for these facilities, and we've accepted quite a few as well. We want to make sure that we're being as clear and transparent as possible when we're doing that and not relying on definitions that are in older zoning bylaws. And then finally, we do want to support the development of communities by ensuring that we're providing these sales in locations where we already have community centers. These are already high traffic nodes where we have a lot of public interaction and engagement. We're just helping the completeness of those communities to carry on. So the provincial policy context that we're working within is also very supportive of what we are proposing. If you look at the policy statements that I specifically put up on the slide there, they are very supportive of ensuring that we are efficiently using municipal-owned facilities. So we're sustaining the financial well-being of the municipality. That's right from the provincial policy context, or provincial policy statement, sorry. The second policy piece there as well also points to the need to focus on fostering social interaction and community connectivity, and we can use those and promote those active, healthy communities through the best and highest use of our municipally owned facilities. Even more policy context. 1.6.3 points to the use of existing infrastructure and optimizing the public service facilities as best as we can. So again, provincial policy is very heavy on making sure that we are using these facilities as best as we can. And 1.6.5 points to the co-location and cost effectiveness of service integration. So while the city wouldn't necessarily be providing a service at these trade shows or at these events, we are ensuring that we are most efficiently using them, and we are providing opportunities for that co-location, I guess, of places and shows that are in the public interest. The official plan is also really supportive of the policies that we're putting forward. So what we see here in 2.1.1 is that we are trying to focus growth within the urban area. So by allowing these facilities to be used for these events, we aren't necessarily pushing them maybe outside of the urban area. And we're also maximizing the use of the investments that we've already made in the infrastructure and public amenities that we have. So again, it's about that efficiency piece. We have these buildings. We should use them as best as we can. And then Section 2 and Section 4 also point towards that, using our facilities as efficiently, sustainably, and strategically as possible. That's Section 2 with the city structure. We have these buildings. Let's use them as best as we can. And then Section 4 talks about using our municipal infrastructure in a fiscally prudent manner. So that is definitely served by doing this. So this chart, shows you the current zoning, the official plan designations, and the permitted uses for the 4 arenas and the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor. And I want to direct your attention to that bottom row there, the example events. These are all events that have happened in these facilities before, or that have been proposed to happen in these facilities. And they are, again, they are permitted generally within the way that the zoning's phrased, but it's not explicitly clear whether we do or don't propose them, whether they're ancillary or accessory, and the duration and length of those events. So we're really looking to just clean up the definitions and what we have in our zoning bylaw to make it clear and consistent for everybody. So the new definitions that we're proposing, arena is the big one. It's currently undefined. We don't actually say what an arena is in our zoning bylaws. So by doing that specifically with these 4 arenas, it allows us to tack on other definitions in recreational facility, which will be redefined, that give us the ability to say, not just in any recreational facility, but specifically in an arena, you can use them rather as trade shows or for specific day retail sales. So we are creating the definition arena, and we are going to say that arenas can have trade shows and specific day retail sales. But by redefining recreational facility, we leave it closed so that not every recreational facility in the city can be used to do so. So again, we're making it very clear where these trade shows and where these specific day retail sales would be permitted. And they're only within the context where we are already having them. We're just making it very clear that that is where they are permitted and that they are for specific day periods. So this shows you what that looks like. For those 4 arenas there, Center 70, the Kingston Memorial Center, Cataraqui Community Center, and the Invista Center, we are proposing to permit specific day retail sales accessory to an arena and trade shows as an accessory use to the arena as well. And then here at the Portsmouth and Olympic Harbor, we want to permit specifically trade shows. Then we have one final technical amendment. As we were going through the definitions, we found that the definition and the permitted uses, sorry, not the definition, just the permitted uses for the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor actually have an error with an Oxford comma there. We made educational classes dependent upon being under the jurisdiction of a university, community college, or board of education. We don't want that. Again, if we're looking at the highest and best use for these facilities, that would actually preclude, for example, private business from running educational or training events here at Portsmouth Olympic Harbor. So, for example, training your employees how to tarp up boats or how to launch boats, those would not currently be allowed unless they were taught under the jurisdiction of a university or community college. We don't want that. That's really limiting. This just allows us to ensure that we are within the definitions and the parameters of the zoning bylaw allowing these kinds of classes and these kinds of uses at Portsmouth. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? I'm just going to clarify, community schools, that's what you would mean by that a business class or?
So within the definition there, community schools are a permitted use, they may use it, and educational classes independent of the community schools, and courses taught under the jurisdiction of a community college or university. So whereas before it was community schools can use it, educational classes or courses under a university or community college could use it, we're now separating the educational classes from the university college side. So community schools could always use it. And now we're allowing educational classes that may not have any affiliation with a community school or with a university to be able to use the facility as well.
Okay. You get it. Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation. I have a quick question. So in terms of the Center 70, it's not really specific. Can people hold meetings and give educational classes there as well? Even though it's listed under specific retail sales?
So through the chair, Center 70 is currently zoned institutional. So within the institutional zone, there are a lot of non-commercial activities basically that are permitted in that area. So having community events, if we're speaking like a Rotary Club meeting or a Hockey Association meeting, those things are permitted. If we are running an event there that is for profit, a specific day retail sale, sorry. Currently, if there are educational components within that, they are permitted, but they need to have an educational component to be permitted. What we're doing is opening up the definition to make it clear what is or is not permitted for these types of trade shows and specific day retail sales. There was a little bit of definition juggling. There were educational components at all these events that we were running, but sometimes they weren't necessarily The educational components weren't really what we were looking to have at that specific use. It's by using the, I'm going to walk that back, I apologize. We are currently mandating that there needs to be an educational component to every single use, and that's not necessarily the highest and best use of the facilities as is currently allowed.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to open it to members of the meeting to members of the public. Are there any comments? Mr. Dixon, if you'd like to come to the microphone.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering, could you just back up one slide? We have the amendment. Actually, no, the one that you showed just before. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so I got one other further amendment, just to suggest. If you have a comma after university. Right? Because, and I have one question. I'm a chess person, okay? And chess it's not a sport, and it's not an art, and it's not a science, or it is sort of part of all those. So I'm wondering if a chess tournament would be a possible inclusion into the modified realm of what you're proposing. Is there anything to preclude that? Say, well, you have 50 or 75 or 100 people. I mean, I've been an organizer of the Canadian post-secondary event, for example, at Queen's. But it didn't have to be at Queen's. It could have been in other spaces where, say, the costs are less or lighting is better or whatever. Or if you were to organize, say, a chess seminar where you taught, say, an international course in directing, which I've taken. So just a question, right? So would that be a possible use under what you're proposing? Thank you.
Hang on, I'll just wait and see if there's... Mr. Irwin, did you want to comment?
No, I'm just learning.
Okay, well, then please go ahead and respond, Mr. Kuhn.
So to the question about chess tournaments and other maybe not sport but competitive style uses that also could potentially have educational pieces. Within the redefined recreational facility, we do allow a variety of athletic and recreational activities. And then under arena, we allow for those in any capacity that would potentially cause an event, assembly, spectating, or exhibitions. So I think within those broad definitions, those kinds of uses would be completely permitted.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. And
thank you.
Ms. Peachy as well. Terrific. And with that, I will close our second public meeting. And that will conclude our planning committee meeting. We have no business. Oh, minutes. There we go. Sorry. Yep. I didn't check page 6. I need approval of the agenda, please. Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Osanek. All those in favor? Carried. And minutes of Thursday, October 19th. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Osanek. All those in favor? And that's carried. Disclosures of pecuniary interest, delegations, briefings, business, motions, notices of motions, and other business. We had a number of pieces of correspondence on the addits. And the next meeting is Thursday, November 16th. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Turner, Councillor McLaren, all those in favor. Thank you. Thanks very much.